Consequently, within the process of the monastery sacralization, the physical space, the natural landscape, and the human-made architecture operate in the symbiotic unity, alongside narratives of divine and saintly interventions at the given site. Objects imbued with miraculous power, most notably holy relics and miracle-working icons, constitute an additional component in the constructing the secret character of monasteries. However, in this occasion, they will be not subject of our analysis. When analyzing the spatial and architectural configuration of monasteries, it is difficult to identify a definitive pattern applicable to a specific historic period or broader geographical region. The only constants that emerge in their spatial plannings are the monastic Catholicon, monastery Catholicon, which serves as a central axis around which the entirety of life revolves and where the community unites through the liturgy, and the monastic cells designed for individual prayer. The third crucial element in the spatial definition of the monastery is deliberate and distinct separation from the surrounding environment. This isolation can be achieved by selecting a naturally inaccessible location or by closing the monastery with high walls, towers, and other fortifications, most frequently, however, with a combination of two approaches. In practical terms, this isolation from the surrounding space emerged from the need to physically protect the community and monastic properties, a necessity given the turbulent historical realities in the Middle Ages. However, if we move beyond these pragmatic explanations and delve deeper in the significance of the spatial segregation, this aspect leads us to the very paradigm of the monastic ascetics endeavor, at the core of which lies exactly the isolation. Indeed, isolation, solitude, and seclusion from the society are embedded in the very etymological root of the term monasticism, monachos, alone, solitary. Furthermore, the choice of isolation, essentially a form of voluntary withdrawal from the secular society, is prompted by the specific understanding of temporality, the transcendence of earthly life and material world, opposed against the eternity of the heavenly kingdom. Viewing the material world through this prism, the monk seeks to distance himself from the ephemerality of the world and prepare for eternity by subduing earthly passions. Therefore, to gain a holistic understanding of the process and the underlying patterns in the constructing the sacredness of the monastery as a specific topos, we can apply the theoretical framework established by the French philosopher Michel Foucault, through which monasteries may be defined as heterotopias. Foucault articulates this concept to designate other spaces which, unlike utopias that serve as immaterial idealization, represent physically realized counter-sites. Through the concept of heterotopia, Foucault provides an analytical tool for deconstructing structural dichotomies, treating space as fundamentally heterogeneous and relational. This concept is predicated on 6 fundamental principles which will be examined below. Critics leveled against this theory primarily argued that it remains underdeveloped, lacks historical accuracy, and fails to account for diverse sociological perspectives. Furthermore, it has been criticized for establishing rigid divisions, overlooking the reality that these separated spaces often do not define social norms, but rather serve to reinforce them. Despite these critics, the application of the Foucault's concept within archaeology and art history has gained considerable traction over the past few decades. Nevertheless, there remains a notable lack of scholarship that systematically applies the methodological framework established by Foucault on the study of monasteries in the broader context and, of course, in the orthodoxy. In this context, it is important to clearly distinguish the concept of heterotopia from the methodological approach of hierotopia, which has gained considerable prominence within the Byzantine art history over recent decades. Taking this specific gap in the existing literature as our point of departure, this paper attempts to delineate the fundamental characteristics of Byzantine monasteries that directly correspond to the principles of heterotopia. Given the vast scope of the material, we will illustrate these theoretical postulates through specific examples from prominent monastic centers in North Macedonia: St. Clement Panteleimon at Plaošnik in Ohrid, the monastery of the Dormition of the Virgin at Treskavec near Prilep, the monastery of Holy Transfiguration at Zrazen, St. Nicholas in the village of Manastir Mariel. Furthermore, it is crucial to bear in mind that these spatial features identified through these local case studies possess a universal quality and are applicable in Orthodox monasteries in general. The first principle for defining a heterotopia is its anthropological universality. That is the premise that heterotopias are omnipresent cultural phenomena. In the context of our research, it is important to recognize that the human need to withdraw into distinct spaces for religious purposes is present in all cultures through history. If we view the monastery through the lens of its primary purpose and as an edifice designate for spiritual seclusion, it becomes evident that this concept exists in virtually every human society. Second principle, diachronic variability. Liberates space from its static nature, positioning it in the living social construct whose function is redefined across historical epochs. This transformation primarily unfolds within social discourse, in the way the community perceives and articulates the given space. In the context of Orthodox monasteries, this principle is evident as the sacredness of the space remains deeply integrated in the collective memory, even as the physical structures themselves undergo substantial repurposing. Paradigmatic examples of such architectural and cultic stratigraphy include the Treskavec monastery, erected upon the remains of the ancient temple and early Christian basilica, as well as the Plaošnik site in Ohrid, where St. Clement built his monastery church over early Christian foundations, a structure that following the Ottoman conquest has been transformed into Imaret Mosque. Beyond material alternation, diachronic variability is also reflected through the evolution of their social status, which is more connected to the original idea of Foucault. During the era of medieval Christian states, monasteries functioned as a powerful economic centers and institutional representative of the states and local elites. However, upon falling under Ottoman rule, the monasteries lost their institutional primacy and state patronage, transforming into entities deeply intertwined and dependent upon local Christian communities. Through 19th and early 20th century, during the period of revival, their role evolved once again, developing into educational centers through the establishment of schools within the monasteries. Today, in contemporary discourse, these spaces acquire yet another secular dimensions. They are valorized as protected cultural and historical monuments. Furthermore, the third principle, juxtaposition of incompatible spaces, posits that heterotopies possess the unique capability to unite within a single physical location multiple spaces or sites that are inherently incompatible with another. In the case of Orthodox monasteries, these principles manifest on two crucial levels. The first level is observed through the physical and functional unification of the secret and utilitarian spaces within a single complex or building. Although the monastic Catholicon represents the central axis and unites the community through liturgy, the act of worship organically permits the remaining spaces. On the other side, the refectory becomes an extension of the church through the ritualization of meals accompanied by the reading of sacred text. Simultaneously, continuous individual prayer take place in the monastic cells, which serve not merely as a living quarters, but as spaces for ascetic endeavor. Yet, within the same enclosed perimeter, these secret areas coexist alongside purely practical segments such as kitchens, workshops, and gardens. The second level of spatial juxtaposition is revealed through the incorporation of grace within the monastery complex itself, most frequently in and around the Catholicon. This widespread medieval practice, archaeologically attested by numerous burials in the monasteries of Plaošnik, Treskavec, and St. Nicholas in Mariovo, established a unique eschatological unity. In this manner, with the same physical location, the monastery bridged the space of the living in the space of death. Building upon these temporal dimensions, Foucault's fourth principle, heterochrony, temporal discontinuity, postulates that heterotopias begin to function at full capacity only when they arrive at an absolute break within traditional time. In the context of monasteries, concept is realized on one hand through the suspension of secular time and turned toward the internal temporality, strictly dictated by the liturgical schedule. Through the perpetual repetition on the daily canonical hours and the annual liturgical cycles, a state of internal present is created, a time that not pass, but is constantly renewed in anticipation with the timeless of the heavenly kingdom. On the other hand, we can also observe the second dimension of heterochrony within the monasteries, the accumulation or layering of time. This aspect is most tangibly visible in the fact that the monasteries at Plaušnik, Treskavec, Manastir Marijovo, Zrze were erected on the sites where ancient temples has already existed or were founded directly upon the remains of the early Christian basilicas and older churches. In this way, a direct spatio-temporal continuity and the pre-existing sacredness of the site is achieved. Furthermore, the secondary use of older architectural elements, polia, most frequently found on in the monastery churches itself, represent an act of directly displaying and showcasing the deep civilizational roots and ancient sanctity of the space. A prime example of such practices are the structure of Treskavec Monastery Church, whose western facade incorporates numerous polia from the Roman and early Christian periods. While similar to Zrze and Manastir Marijovo, remains of ancient architectural sculpture are exhibited in the monastery courtyard. The fifth principle, system of opening and closing, is directly reflected in the monasteries through their spatial isolation and strictly controlled access. This seclusion manifests above all through the selection of remote and inaccessible locations, such as the cave dwellings on the vertical cliffs in Zrze, which demand considerable physical exertion to reach. However, regardless of the geographical location, bearing in mind the existence of urban monasteries, the architectural delimitation of the space itself is crucial. This is achieved by erecting high ramparts or by organizing the complex around a closed inner courtyard, as seen in the examples of Treskavec, where the monastic quarters themselves function as a fortification wall. In this manner, access to the outside world is rigorously controlled. Conversely, the system of closing operates from inside out, as the monks themselves were subject to strict control over their movements, as evidenced by surviving monastic typica, as those let's say in Bachkov, Evergetis, and other monasteries. It was precisely defined at the institutional level under which conditions and in which occasions monks were permitted to leave the complex, as well as where they were obligated, when they were obligated to return. The third and perhaps strictest form of restriction is gender-based spatial exclusivity. According to this rule, men are forbidden to enter into specific centers of female monasteries, such as cell and refectories, and vice versa. The most radical and renewed example of such absolute spatial enclosure is, of course, the entire peninsula of Mount Athos. Here, the strict rule of Avaton access in rigorously prohibit not only for women but for any female creature. Within the theological conceptualization of the monastery, the sixth principle, the function of compensation, can be clearly recognized. The monastery is not merely an ordinary edifice, but it is conceived as a compensatory space, a microcosmos of a living model of celestial order, standing in a sharp contrast to the chaotic external world or nature. This seriality is embedded within the very architecture of the monastic churches, where the physical structure functions as the icon of the cosmos. Furthermore, an additional layer of this seriality is provided by the concept that monks lead an angelic life, thereby imbuing the monastery with an even more pronounced celestial dimensions. The perception of the monastery as a space that hierarchically transcends the rest of the world, serving as a vital link between the earthly realm and the heavenly kingdom, is the primary reason why even the most prominent statesmen and intellectuals close to their end their living lives as monks within the monasteries or want to be buried in the monastery churches. At the end of my presentation, I would like to emphasize that applying this philosophical concept to the study of monasteries should be not preserved merely as a theoretical exercise, but rather as an opportunity to introduce diverse and innovative methodological approaches within the Byzantology and medieval studies. Employing the methodological framework inherent in a Foucault's theory enable us to comprehend, systemize, and elucidate the complex ideological layers embedded within monasteries, spaces where the boundary between the practical, the ideological, and the sacred are frequently blurred or altogether non-existent. Defining monasteries as heterotopias allow us to transcend the standard perspectives traditionally offered by the disciplines of art history and archaeology, thereby comprehending them as an integral spatial and temporal system composed of multiple ideological structures. These constructs can in turn be deconstructed and analyzed through specific material and immaterial manifestation imbued with some symbolic meaning. Ultimately, this entire mechanism serves as a singular purpose to construct a secret space that is fundamentally closer to the heavenly kingdom than to the earthly materiality. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alexander Vasilevsky, for having presented his philosophical approach of hierotopy and heterochrony. And now we will pass to Dr. Ralica Ruseva from the Institute of Art Studies, the Bulgarian Academy of Sciences, and one of the organizer of this conference. Thank you. She will present us the processional icons from Nesebar, 13th to 14th century, and the liturgical Chronos.
Dear colleagues, thank you very much for the participation in our art readings. I would like to thank to Nona and Marina, which organized this conference, because almost I do not do nothing with all this difficult organization, administration of the conference took care Nona and Marina. Now I changed a little bit the title, not the processional icon from Nesebar, the processional icons from the Black Sea coast, 13th, 14th century, and the liturgical Chronos. According to my latest research, there are 17 medieval two-sided icons in Bulgaria, which makes it one of the most numerous compact groups of two-sided icons in the Orthodox world. All of them, except for two, come from the southern Black Sea coast. It is likely that every church in Nesebar or Sozopol had a large icon that participate in the processions on Good Friday or the church fests. The bilateral icons from Bulgaria are distinguished by a wide variety of themes and original iconography. The appearance of the first two-sided icons in 12th century linked to changes worship service during the Holy Week. The first center where the creation of two-sided icons was necessary was probably Constantinople. In the capital Constantinople itself, a few examples of two-sided icons have been preserved, so we can judge the stylistic and iconographic characteristic of two-sided icons from Constantinople in the 20th and 14th century, mainly by the preserved examples from other places, including Nesebar. The majority of the two-sided icons were created during the Paleologian period, which was a result of the imposition of lavish palace and church ceremonies, including icon processions in Constantinople. The ecclesia during the Holy Week are complicated by the introduction of all-night vigils, agrypnies, and icon processions, not only in the monastery churches. Most icons were created as two-sided during this period, but there are also examples of painting on the reverse side of some earlier one-sided icon during this period. This shows that in 13th-14th century, the need for more two-sided icons increased not only in Constantinople, but throughout the Orthodox world. Most researchers believe that the primary purpose of two-sided icons is related to the Good Friday services, as the most numerous two-sided icons depicts on one side the image of Virgin Mary or Christ, on the other side the crucifixion of Christ or another Passion of Christ-related scene, descent from the cross, Christ in the tomb, or lamentation. And this also applies to two-sided icons in Bulgaria. Besides Good Friday, it is very likely that they participated in church processions in other occasions. A relatively large number of two-sided icons from 14th century originate from the region of the southern Black Sea, on which Holy Virgin Mary or Christ, and on the other side the crucifixion of Christ is painted. There are 10 billion two-sided icons depicting the same subject. This testified that the processions similar to those in Constantinople were probably held in Nessebar or Sozopol. But for a pity, we have no written sources about these processions. The bilateral processional icons were apparently very popular in 14th century and reflecting the liturgical practice of this time. Now I will show few. It's a detail from this Constantinople school. It is the other side, which was lost. Another two-sided icon, Constantinople school. Another, it is not two-sided, but on the same subject. This is less known two-sided icon. This side is very famous of the icon, but the other side with the crucifixion is recently published. Details. Another two-sided icon, which was one-sided icon from 11th, 12th century, in the 14th became a two-sided icon with the same subject. Another less known, recently published, very damaged icon. Details, and it is really incredible. Only the eye of the St. John the Theologian was preserved, but it is so expressive, and he is crying. Another, which is famous two-sided icon. Some of the work of masters from Constantinople, others demonstrate similarities with works from Thessaloniki and Mount Athos, while other reflects Western influences or compilation of various influences. The comparison of these icons reveals the diversity in the interpretation of the same plot, the use of different iconographic models and aesthetic preferences during the same period. In almost all examples, the site with the image of Holy Virgin was repeated in the 16th, 17th, or 18th century, and we cannot draw conclusion about its style and iconography. The site with the image of the crucifixion of Christ, however, either was no late interventions or they are insignificant. That is why they are among the main evidence of the development and diversity of the Paralogian iconography in Bulgaria. Processional icons and the topos. To carry out from the sacred space of the holy image to the profane space during the procession sacrifice the profane space. Here I will quote Alexei Lidov's conception about the Tuesday miraculous performances with the Odigritria icon in Constantinople. He tried to argue that the miraculous image was not merely a panel or any kind of material picture, but the bearer of sacred space. The spatial imagery which appeared around a miracle-working item, could be transferred to other environments as happened with the holy objects. In this way, a mystical link between geographically distant areas was established. They were included in the Christian iconic hall and the hierarchy of sacred space rooted in the Holy Land, and Constantinople preserved as the New Jerusalem, a venerated place of the Second Coming. The spatial icons played the role of the vehicles of divine energy radiating from the most sacred centers. The cosmic image of salvation included different layers of time which interacted in the single whole, the eternal presence of heavenly beings. We may suppose that for the Byzantines was one of the most important forms of their spiritual life, when the most sacred values were open to everyone, and the divine energy consecrated everyday life and the usually profane urban environment. This spatial imaginary could not be formalized as a kind of illustration of any particular text. At the same time, it included a range of symbolic connotations which coexisted in the changing dynamic context of the sacred performance in the space. The traditional methodology of iconographic studies based on the principle of text illustration has not taken account in this spatial imagery. Another example is very less known icon, only fragment of the crucifixion, another crucifixion and Holy Virgin. Two-sided processional icons express the idea of Chronos, Kairos, and Aeon together. During the processions, within the cyclical time Kairos of the ritual, the linear time of Chronos with a chronology of events is located. The two-sided icons during the liturgy are included in annual cyclical liturgical time. At the same time, they also illustrate the linear chronos of the Passion events, but also at the same time symbolized eternity aeon because of the soteriological meaning of crucifixion. Another important question being discussed is what the function of the two-sided icons was when they were not used in processions and liturgy, and where they were placed. The opinion that they were mounted on the iconostasis has already been confirmed, but some were probably placed on a special proscenitaria. On the iconostasis, the two-sided icon is placed with the side with the image of Holy Virgin or Christ facing the nave towards the believers, and the image of crucifixion of Christ or Christ in the tomb facing to the altar towards the priest. Placed on the iconostasis with the image of crucifixion facing the altar, the two-sided icon is included on the one hand in the daily and weekly cycle of divine services, symbolically and literally present the plot of the crucifixion as an event, and also illustration of Stavrotheotokia of Joseph the hymnographer. Particularly important, however, is the presence during the Holy Liturgy at the consecration of the gifts, where there is a specific Eucharistic symbolism of the image of the crucifixion as a Christ's sacrifice. More examples, there are 10, it's very unique iconography here. Another two-sided icon. Separating the sides of the two-sided icons from each to other in a similar way suggests that each image can function independently regardless of the other, within its own spatial and sacred context. There are 4 known icons in the Orthodox world on which festive scenes are depicted on the one side, 2 of which originate from Bulgaria. The icon from Melnik is also among the earliest two-sided icons, and researchers dated to the end of 12th century and beginning of the 13th century. On the one side is Holy Virgin and Annunciations, on the other Passion scenes. 3 icons with festive narrative scenes from the Paleologian period are known, one of which probably originated from Nessebar. Now, the slide. The scenes are 12, but they do not correspond exactly to the 12 great feasts, as descent of Christ from the cross is presented instead of Pentecost. This highlights of the Easter theme, as the icon was carried during the litanies during the Holy Week, specifically on Good Friday. The two-sided icons with accurate epinosis, and even more so with scenes from the Paschal cycle, as this icon, do not require changing the icon on the analoi or proskinitaria during Holy Week. Therefore, the two-sided icon with Passion scenes was located in the temple space throughout Holy Week, and the drama of the services was centered around it. This is the same two-sided icon. Now I would like to pay attention to the two epitaph icons, Epitaphios Trinus. The two icons reproduce the iconography of embroidered epitaph shrouds from the 13th-14th century, and they was an integral part of the Good Friday divine services, and maybe, or surely, maybe they are included in the processions. They have a specific shape horizontally and launched that distinguish it from the traditional icons. It depicts the heavenly lamentation for the dead Christ by angels in diaconical garments. These two icons from Nessebar are the earliest so far known in the Byzantine world with this iconography and form. Similar icons, but depicting the lamentation of Christ by the Holy Mother of God and his disciple, were painted in the late 15th century on the islands of Crete and Patmos. When they are not using for the processions, they are placed above the royal gates on the iconostasis, and during divine services on Good Friday, they accompanied the procession with the shroud. Detail from this Epitaphios icon, and another Epitaphios icon, and detail from this icon. Two examples of two-sided icons with the image of Christ Pantocrator on one side and Holy Virgin Eleusa from the other, created during the Paleologian period in Nessebar. As far as I know, the two-sided icons published so far have no parallel among the preserved two-sided icons from the Middle Ages in the Orthodox world. These two images are not tied to a specific holiday and allow the icon to be carried in processions in any occasion. This is the one, Holy Virgin Eleusa, the one side, and the other, Christ Pantocrator. This image is repainted in 18th century, but originally is from the 14th century. And the other two-sided icon, again with the Holy Virgin Eleusa. The Eleusa type of iconography of the Virgin Mary is probably related to the famous Eleusa monastery in Nessebar, renovated by Tsar Ivan Alexander. These two large processional icons, which have no iconographic parallel among other Byzantine two-sided icons, show that there was some local liturgical tradition that was popular in Nessebar in the 14th century, which necessitated their creation. The reason for painting of those icons beside the famous Eleusa monastery in Mesembria can also be found in the theological interpretation of the Eleusa iconographic type. Many researchers have found a connection between the iconography of Eleusa, Mother of God, and the suffering Virgin Mary in front of the crucified Christ. In this way, the image of Eleusa icons of the Virgin Mary symbolized or symbolically associated with the scenes of the crucifixion of Christ. And the last two-sided icon I would like to show you is another unique iconography. From the one side is painted St. George. The image is repainted in 16th century. On the other side are his parents, Saint Gerontius and Saint Polychronia. There is absolutely no parallel of this two-sided icon. In Mesembria, there was two churches dedicated to Saint George Mali, Saint George Polemi, and maybe in the vicinity a monastery. This icon is also work of the Constantinople painters. And I would like to finish with the words of Albena Milanova in the previous session, and to say that these processional icons and these great processions in the Paleologian period, this opening the closed space to open to the urban space, and they make in this way all the cities with the procession in a big church, in an open sacred space. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ralica Ruseva. Indeed, I believe that this is the right point. Thank you for sharing with us this superb and unique material from the Black Sea coast, and for correlating the notions Keros, Chronos, Eon with the liturgical processions. Thank you very much. Now we will pass to Elisabeta Negrau from George Oprescu Art History Institute of the Romanian Academy in Bucharest, with the subject Some Realistic Depictions of Relics in Kosia Monasteries, Menologion, 1391, and the Evolution of the Topos of Death in Late Byzantine Art.
Thank you very much. And I'm very happy to be here for the third time now already. I thank the organizers for inviting me and for including me in this edition. So my talk today will be about death as a central theme in Byzantine theology and iconography. But from the perspective of the iconography of the dead body. Death is the central theme in Byzantine theology and iconography, which approaches it primarily from the perspective of the soul's condition in the afterlife. Artistic representations tend to focus less on the episode of the bodily decay than on the journey of the soul, and in this regard, saintly death exemplifies the proper holy transition to the afterlife. This emphasis is clearly reflected in the Synaxarion, for example, which abounds in accounts and visualizations of the death of the saints, whether the saints fall asleep peacefully in death or suffer violent execution. But in all such cases, the body is shown fully clothed and preserving the recognizable features and social status that the person held in life. As Christopher Walter has argued, the predominantly intellectual character of Byzantine art tended to prevent artists from employing overly realistic details that might distract from the spiritual theological meanings. Instead, artists relied on stable iconographic topoi that corresponded to general doctrinal ideas rather than to contingent observations of time, space, and matter. Death functioned as one of such topos, but always linked to the perspective of theosis or its failure of eternal salvation or damnation. Likewise, Greek and Roman traditions had been less preoccupied with the gruesome and grotesque visions of the dead body itself and concentrated more instead on the spiritual, social, and emotional implications of mortality. Byzantine art sustained a similar restraint. It rarely delved into the realism of the bodily decay. When it did, as in the case of the skull of Adam, for example, in the crucifixion scene, or the grotesque image of Hades in the Herring of Hell, it functioned symbolically as a theological pivot for the idea of salvation. My presentation does not address the soul's journey following the moment of death, nor the complexity of the funerary programs in churches. Instead, it considers the iconographic representation of the dead body. The connection between the resurrection of the bodies at the Last Judgment and the funerary function of spatial environments dates back to the early centuries of Christianity, and the first visual instantiations of the vision of the resurrection of the dry bones, witnessed by the prophet Ezekiel, date from the pre-iconoclastic period. Yet, while the Byzantine restraint to depict death remains significant, the visualization of death increased with the Komnenian period. A particularly significant example is found in the monastic two-story ossuary at Bachkovo, the only such crypt that preserves its painted program. In the lower chapel, a monumental deicide scene in the apse is set against a fresco on the western wall of the naos depicting the prophet Ezekiel's vision of the resurrection of dry bones. Here, the bodies are treated as transparent, naked silhouettes rising from the heap of bones against an incandescent background that testify to the intensity of the eschatological moment. This eschatological program is complemented in the narthex of the crypt by a last judgment. Similarly, the vision of the resurrection of the dry bones is alluded to on the phylacterion of prophet Ezekiel in a sepulchral church contemporary with Bachkovo, the Saint Trinity Chapel of the Catholicon of Kutsuvendis Monastery in North Cyprus. It too was established by the end of the 11th century and depicted by 1100, like Bachkovo, as a final resting place of a military dignitary of Alexios I Komnenos. During the Komnenian period, images of the dead Christ, such as the deposition from the cross, the threnos or lamentation, and Christ in tomb, begin to appear. Such images were expanding on the aspects of love, suffering, and the loss brought by the death of Christ, the Son of God incarnate. Theological aspects on which iconography touched too little upon earlier. They emphasized the theological ideas of Christ's loving sacrifice and kenosis in death. Like never before, such images concentrated on the intense grief provoked by death that meant to instill emotion in the act of contemplation, a trend that Hans Belting defined as the transition to the development of private devotion, of a type of piety understood as a private and internal emotional affective process. This process becomes more acute in the West, but the Komnenian new visuality testifies as well to this new psychological realism, which is also true for the fast Komnenian literary production on death, laments, consolations, and pieces of praise in prose and verse that marked the evolution of artistic rhetoric in Komnenian Byzantium toward a new form of humanism marked by the perception of time and by psychological depth. After the Komnenian developments, the death topos reached a new point, as I will try to argue, in the Paleologan period. The interest in this topos is visible in representations such as the canon for he who is at the point of death, in the St. George Chapel in the Tower of St. George belonging to Hilandar Monastery. A cycle developed further in the exonarthex of St. Sophia's Church in Ohrid in the mid-14th century. In this cycle, the body eventually does not end up buried in the earth, but as a special manifestation of penance, is thrown away to be devoured and digested by beasts, as a material reflection of the idea of digestion of the bodies by Hades, the death itself. The emergence of themes such as personification of death giving to the dying person the cup of death in the Tomic Psalter and the Serbian Psalter in Munich links to the same tendency representing the macabre and emphasizing the bitterness of the death hour, meant to instill in believers extreme humility and repentance for sins. The writing of the poem Oron Setafe before 1323 yields images perhaps already in the late Paleologan period, which did not survive. For some time, this was considered a post-Byzantine creation, composed before 1484 by a certain Sisoes, who wrote a poem about death meditation over an open grave. However, Konstantinos Vafiadis in 2017 published a late Byzantine Hermeneia dated to circa or shortly post 1323 that contains the poem Oron Setafe, which is presented in the Hermeneia under the heading Verses at the Tomb, thereby indicating that the intended setting in which the inscription was going to be depicted was an arcosolium or a wall near a tomb. The epigram Oron Setafe may therefore be contextualized within late Byzantine poetry and its revivification of classical tropes in funerary epigrams regarding the unescapability of death, inexorability of death. This setting reminds of the arcosolium of Ostoia Rajakovic and its inscription at Peribletos Church in Ohrid that reads, "And you, my beloved brethren, from you who read this, I do beseech, redeem, pray for this servant of God who can become as for you can become as I am, and yet I can never be as you are again." The inscription alludes to the pitiful state of the dead who are not able anymore to do the things of mercy for themselves and thus rely on the prayers and alms of the living. But it is obvious that these words function as a memento mori as well. Remember that you have to die. This inscription has been compared with the Western legend of the three living and the three dead, which was the first fully developed macabre scene in European culture. That already by the beginning of the 14th century was widely disseminated, both in text and in image. By the late 14th century, the so-called cadaver monuments, or transit tombs, begin to appear, displaying gruesome representations of decaying corpses as a memento mori to remind viewers of the transience and vanity of mortal life. It's been stated that the physical renderings of such highly unpleasant visions did not come into usage until the end of the 13th century, when a psychological realism about death reached its development in the West, and macabre themes such as Dance of Death and the Three Living and the Three Dead started to spread. Late 13th century is also the time when a theology of the bodily decompositions appears in relation to the doctrine of the purgatory, and the belief that the purifying pain of the soul in purgatory is reflected by the decomposition of the body, physical decomposition of the body, an idea which gets further visualization in iconography. The late Byzantine preoccupations with death, with meditations on death and bodily decay, are surprisingly contemporary with their Western counterparts. The idea of bodily decomposition finds a surprisingly realistic expression in image at Kozia Monastery in Wallachia. In the Menologion of the Narthex, of Kozia, painted in 1391, there are three cases of representing relic bodies of saints realistically as dried corpses. They depict scenes of relics being discovered, with witnesses opening the tombs and acknowledging the sacrality of the relics, and scenes of translation and or placing relics in chests for veneration. These scenes illustrate the calendar days of February 22, depicting the commemoration of the discovery of the relics of holy martyr men and women buried near the Eugenius Gate in Constantinople during the reign of Emperor Arcadius. The next one is June 28, the finding and the translation of the relics of the holy and mercenary doctors Cyrus and John in Alexandria in the year 412. And the commemoration of the translation of the relics of Saint Apostle Bartholomew on August 25, which celebrates both the arrival of his relics in Lipari in Sicily and their subsequent move to Benevento. All scenes depict the relics realistically as naked, desiccated brownish bodies of men and women with their facial and bodily features decayed and unrecognizable. Moreover, the scenes do not illustrate ceremonies, but depict witnesses opening the sarcophagus and looking at the corpses and acknowledging their holiness. Never before in Byzantium were scenes and bodies of reposed saints represented as such. Usually, the finding or the translation of relics has been represented in two ways: as closed coffins, as in the Menologion of Basil II, or Menologion of Decani, for example, or as dormition scenes, with the saints represented as if sleeping, fully clothed, on deathbeds or catafalques, surrounded by a procession of people who venerate them. Byzantine funerary art kept the Hellenistic principle of depicting the physical likeness and status signs of the deceased ones. The portraits served as a memory of their likeness. Scholars such as Ivan Dârpici and Bisera Penceva have stressed the paramount presence and importance of concepts such as pothos, meaning love, desire, and the ideas of mnemosyne, remembrance, and the visual splendor which were at play in Byzantium, especially when representing figures of saints. But this is not what we see at Kosia. The Menologion of Kosia closely respects the Typicon of the Great Church of Constantinople and share correspondences with some Athonite Menologia. The inscriptions are in Slavonic translation, which conserves traces of Greek original, and overall, the painters at Kosia manifest strong connections with the Byzantine capital, probably mediated via the Balkans. We really don't know because of the lack of such of close examples. So it is the empire what we should look for the origins of these realistic depictions of relics, although such images seem to have gained less ground in the Byzantine large metropolis like Constantinople or Thessaloniki, and probably more ground in the Byzantine provinces and the Balkans. And I'm referring here especially to the images such as Oronsetafe, which is very frequent in the Balkans. At Kosia, the visual program does not constitute what we would classify as a macabre scene, nor does it function as a vanitas. The bodies depicted are ones of saints, and the scenes are presented as acts of recognition of their holiness. Yet the degree of realism in the representation appears to diminish the visual radiance and that traditionally characterized portraits of saints. Why then was such realism selected? One plausible explanation may be related to late Byzantium and the Balkans' profound political and eschatological fears experienced at the time. The capital was lost and then recovered in 1261, but nevertheless, by the late 14th century, the empire was left much diminished, while the Balkans were mostly lost to the Ottomans. The ultimate termination of the earthly empire of Byzantium, understood to be preordained as the final stage of universal history, was believed to bring the end of the world. The Byzantine political thought, shaped by apocalyptic literature, in this thought, Byzantium was seen as the empire to be dissolved by Antichrist at the end of time. In this regard, the cultural production of the period is inseparable from these eschatological concerns regarding the fate of the empire as the fate of the world. The Byzantine had an even more propensity for, the Balkans had even more propensity for such eschatological concerns. In the face of political pressures, later Byzantine emperors actively sought support in the wider late medieval Europe by the way of a relic diplomacy and an icon diplomacy, which were the current gifts that the later Byzantine emperors were giving to Western rulers in order to gain the desired support. Balkan states moved their relics as well in order to save them. Byzantium actively cultivated and projected to Europe as a strategy the message of the internal imperium, the katechon against Antichrist, and the cosmic catastrophe that was at stake if this empire fell, a concern shared by the Balkan states. In the Menologion, which was an empire of time, which was an image of time, a cycle of the feasts of the year, includes at Kosia death and decay as a topos, even with regards to saints. This is a remainder of the reality that nothing escapes time and death, not even the saintly bodies, not even the empires, not even the katechon of Antichrist. But like the bodies of the saints, the message points to the transcendence of death. Although decayed and dried, the bones of saints continue to sustain the world through their divine grace. Perhaps also Byzantium, aided by the Balkan states, heavily diminished and threatened by dissolution, sustained their with their godly grace, similar to relics, the faith of the church, and prevented the coming of Antichrist. In conclusion, the different Byzantine periods elaborated distinct facets of the topos of death, shaped by their respective intellectual and devotional preoccupations. The Middle Byzantine period exhibits a pronounced orientation towards eschatology, emphasizing the teleology of death that concludes with the resurrection of the bodies and the last judgment. The Komnenian period emphasized the affective experience of love, loss, and pain in the presence of death in relation to the development of a theology of the kenosis and sacrifice of Christ. Finally, the Paleologan period develops meditations in which death functions as a decisive test of all things. It foregrounds the vanity and transience of earthly life, while simultaneously confirms that sacredness is the only thing that persists beyond death. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elisabetta Negrau, for the presentation of the death as topos, an art. Now we will continue with Dr. Yehonas Pachiou Yavchenska, okay, sorry, from the National Conservation Center in Skopje. And the communication is titled The Roaring Image, the Lion Across Time and Space in Byzantine Visual Culture.
Thank you very much. Dear and esteemed colleagues, it has become almost tradition for me to participate in the conferences in Sofia. And at this point, I have lost count of how many times I have had the privilege of being among its contributors, among you. For this very reason, I would like to begin by sincerely congratulating the organizers for another successfully realized scholarly gathering. It is both an honor and a genuine pleasure for me to be part of this distinguished conference. I was expecting Professor Nenad Makuljevic to be moderator of this session, but I'm delighted that you are the moderator, although I respect and very much Professor Makuljevic, but your articles have opened a lot of doors for my researches, so I'm glad. As you already mentioned, the title of my theme is the roaring image, the lion across time and space in Byzantine visual culture. Images in Byzantine art rarely function as isolated visual signs. They are conceived as meaningful presences shaped by theology, liturgical practice, and the articulation of sacred space. Within this visual language, certain images attain a particular density of meaning, unfolding through narrative, symbol, and theological reference. The lion is one such image. My choice of this theme is not inspired solely by the name of my son, Leon, although that personal association sharpened my sensitivity to the motif. The origins of this inquiry reach further back to earlier research on the painted program in the porch of the Church of St. Athanasius of Alexandria in the Jurcha monastery. There, the appearance of the lion within a liminal architecture zone caused a reconsideration of its visual and symbolic role, not as an isolated detail, but as an image carefully integrated into a broader visual and spatial conception. This presentation also grows out of my interest in individual figures and scenes within Byzantine art, and as in those cases, the aim here is not to collect, every instance in which the lion appears, but to follow selected examples that reveal how meaning is articulated through placement, context, and visual form. In Byzantine imagery, the lion is never simply an animal. It appears at decisive moments of sacred history, from the creation and primordial act of naming in Eden, through episodes of trial and divine protection, to the eschatological imagery of the Last Judgment and the Apocalypse. Across this temporal span, The lion embodies a tension between untamed force and sanctified presence, between threat and salvation. The lion is approached here as an image through which sacred time, Chronos, and sacred space, topos, are brought into relation. Its presence in narrative scenes, hagiographic cycles, and architectural thresholds marks points of transition, signaling boundaries between wilderness and sanctuary, the earthly and the divine, historical time and eschatological fulfillment. Through selected examples from different regions and periods of the Byzantine world, this presentation seeks to show how the lion functions as chronotopic image, binding place to sacred history and anchoring theological meaning within the visual field. I will not retrace the well-known trajectory of the lion's symbolism from prehistoric times through ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, Hellenistic Roman world, heraldic systems, or other cultural traditions. Even broader resonances, such as its linguistic presence in the already former Bulgarian national currency, the lev, meaning lion, or in Romanian and Moldovan currency, will remain outside the scope of this presentation. Instead, I now turn to the images themselves in Christianity. As a symbol of power and strength, the lion possesses several characteristics that Christian allegory associates with Christ. According to medieval exegetical tradition, the lion ascends to the highest and descends again, just as Christ ascends to heaven and descends into hell. The Physiologus further relates that lion cubs are born dead to be revived by their father after 3 days, a clear typological parallel to the resurrection. Another attribute, the lion, sleeping with open eyes, became identified with Christ as the anapeson, or the unsleeping eye, who sleeps in the flesh, yet remains eternally vigilant in his divinity. One of the earliest and most foundational sources for the image of the Lion of Judah, as seen on the sides of this sarcophagus, lies in scripture itself. In Genesis 49:9, Judah is compared to a young lion, evoking strength, sovereignty, and the promise of lasting rule, acquiring a messianic dimension through the Davidic lineage. This image reaches its fullest articulation in Revelation 5:5, where Christ is proclaimed as the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the one worthy to open the sealed book of history, yet revealed as a sacrificial lamb, establishing a paradox between power and self-offering. The earliest extant representations of the lion in Christian art, dating from the 2nd to the 4th century and beyond, are frequently associated with the scene of Prophet Daniel in the lion's den, recounted in Daniel chapter 6, as seen in the fresco of the old episcopal basilica in Stobi. Cast into the den for refusing to abandon his prayer, Daniel remains unharmed, for my God sent his angel and shut the lion's mouths. In the iconographic tradition, he is typically depicted frontal and orant, serene amidst the threatening beasts. The lions, though present as agents of death, are rendered subdued, emphasizing not their ferocity, but their submission to divine command. The scene transcends its narrative framework, becoming a paradigmatic image of deliverance, where enclosed space of the den evokes the realm of death or the underworld, while Daniel's preservation signifies divine intervention. A particularly significant example is the ceramic relief plaque from Vinica, where Daniel stands between two symmetrically arranged lions. This composition, together with its inscription, reinforces a theological message of divine guidance and protection, presenting his deliverance as both a proclamation of God's providence and a typological prefiguration of the resurrection. Within this early Christian context, the lion is transformed from a symbol of a devouring force into a participant in a theology of salvation, integrated in a chronotop that binds suffering, divine judgment, and eschatological hope. In the diaconical apse of the southern basilica at Plaoshnik in Ohrid is the illustration or mosaic of the Psalm 90 or 91:13, which consists of centrally placed cantharus and two lambs drinking water from it. The lambs are treading on a lion and a serpent. I'm sorry, this was the detail of the previous scene. A related motif appears in the baptistry of the same basilica in Ohrid, where a lion is coiled by 3 snakes. Among other examples is the one from Ravenna, where Christ himself, dressed as warrior emperor, is treading on a lion and a serpent. The symbolism of these scenes is clarified by Saint Athanasius, who interprets the psalm as expressing the victory of the people of God over all enemies and demons. Further on, important symbolic motif in Christian iconography is the tetramorph, denoting the 4 living creatures. The first creature resembles a lion, followed by the ox or calf, the human or angelic figure, and the eagle in flight. Each is endowed with multiple pairs of wings, while also possessing human hands and feet, standing upon fiery thrones as described in the vision of the prophet Ezekiel. According to Ezekiel and also the Revelation, they stand before and around the throne of the Most High, ceaselessly proclaiming praise. Within the symbolic language, the lion, placed first among the 4, embodies majesty, strength, and vigilant authority. By the early 3rd century, Christian exegetes had already interpreted the 4 living creatures as prefigurations of the evangelists, a tradition that ultimately associated the lion with Mark the Evangelist, which is his symbol, even on those kind of representations. Another conceptually charged appearance of the lion occurs in the Genesis cycle, particularly in scenes of the creation and the naming of the animals in Eden, where the lion enters sacred history at the very moment of creation. In representations of Christ, the Creator, creating the terrestrial animals, sometimes combined with the creation of Adam, as in the Palatine Chapel in Palermo, Monreale Cathedral, Decani Monastery, and St. Mark's Basilica in Venice, lions are frequently depicted, usually in pairs. In the scene of the naming of the animals, Adam appears as the first witness and participant in the ordering of creation, giving names to the creatures brought before him, among which the lion occupies the first place as the most noble of the beasts. Even on this 19th century icon representing the original scene, the lion is among Adam and Eve. Within the same Genesis cycle, the lion also appears in representations of the Noah's Ark and the flood. In these scenes, the animals are shown entering the ark in ordered pairs, following the divine command given to Noah. Among them, the lion is regularly included as one of the creatures preserved through the catastrophe that renews creation. Such depictions are well known in the monumental programs of the already mentioned chapels, cathedrals, and monasteries, where the procession of animals towards and outside the ark visually conveys the preservation and restoration of the created world after the flood. The iconographic theme of the anapeson, the reclining one, or the unsleeping eye, as in the Church of St. Nicholas in Oreovec Monastery, Македонски Брод, is closely related to the biblical comparison of Christ with the lion, derived from Jacob's prophecy in Genesis, where the Messiah is prefigured, as we already mentioned, the Lion of Judah. In Byzantine theological interpretation, the lion becomes a symbol of Christ's death and resurrection. Although Christ appears to sleep in death, his divine nature remains ever vigilant and victorious. In the composition Praise the Lord from the Heavens, the sign of the lion, or Leo, appears as one of the zodiac figures symbolizing the cosmic order, praising God. In Byzantine and post-Byzantine interpretations of this theme, such as in the monasteries of Lesnovo and Poloshko, the zodiac signs are incorporated into the visual program to express the idea that all elements of the universe participate in glorifying the Creator, reflecting the text of Psalm 148, where the heavens and celestial bodies are called to praise the Lord. The zodiac sign of Leo, often associated with months of July or August, appears as one of the 12 symbols representing the annual cycle of time and the cosmos or space. The lion, therefore, functions not only as an astrological motif, but as a part of a broader cosmological imagery integrated into Christian theology. Conversely, the lion also appears in a more general context within the composition, representing the wild beasts of the earth that praise God in accordance with the same psalm. This psalm calls on all living creatures, wild animals, and all cattle, creeping things, and flying birds, according to King James Version, to praise the Lord. Such is the example from the Church of St. Nicholas in Vița Epirus, or this Russian icon, where the lion is included among the various animals and creatures participating in the universal hymn of praising the Lord. In representations of the Last Judgment, 4 beasts appear as symbols of the 4 kingdoms of the ancient nations that will disappear with the coming of Christ, among which the lion again occupies the first place. The visualization of this kingdom, symbolized by the 4 beasts, is based on Daniel's vision. The earliest known representation within this iconographic context appears in the Snetogorsky monastery near Pskov, followed by their depiction in the wall paintings by Andrei Rublev in the Assumption Cathedral in Vladimir, a formulation that becomes a frequent motif in monumental painting. The symbolic presence of the lion extends as well to the personifications depicted in the Last Judgment. In these representations, the personification of the sea usually retains a more pristine appearance, reflecting its elemental character. By contrast, the personification of Gaia, or the earth, may be shown seated on the ground or upon an animal holding various attributes and symbolic objects. In certain examples, this personification appears mounted upon a lion, as seen in the male figure in the Church of the Savior on Neredica Hill, or in this recently discovered older painting layer from 1297 in the Church of St. Demetrius in Veles. In other monuments, and we can see other examples with the similar and or same representations of the lion, together with the personification of the earth. And in other monuments, the figure may even be flanked by or seated upon 2 lions, a motif that further emphasizes the symbolic association of the animal with dominion over the earthly realm and the forces of nature within the eschatological imagery of the Last Judgment. In the section depicting the general resurrection of the Last Judgment, the lion may also appear among the numerous open graves from which the dead arise. Alongside other animals and birds, it is depicted returning the bodies of the deceased. Such representations visually express the eschatological idea that at the moment of the universal resurrection, all elements of creation, including the beasts that once devoured human bodies, must give them back, enabling the complete restoration and resurrection of the dead. In the Apocalypse, the scenes associated with the prophets Elijah and Enoch, Archangel Michael and the Antichrist, the third scene on certain manuscripts can illustrate the death of Antichrist by the spirit of Christ's mouth. Christ emerged from a cloud with outstretched hands, holding an instrument of wrath in the shape of bestial lion-like head from which fire pours. This is visualization of the prophecy found in second epistle of the Thessalonians, where the words, "The Lord shall consume with the spirit of his mouth," are illustrated with a leonine head. Within the iconographic type of the only begotten Son and Word of God icon, a complex theological composition illustrating the incarnation and Christ's victory over death, a striking motif appears in the lower register, the personification of death itself. The death is often depicted as a skeletal or decomposing corpse-like figure mounted on a lion, trampling over the bodies of the dead. The lion, as death mount, symbolizes the destructive forces of the earthly realm and the inevitability of human mortality. This imagery forms part of a broader soteriological and eschatological narrative, visualizing the dominion of death over the material world, while simultaneously emphasizing the theological contrast with the salvific presence of Christ. The motif serves not just as a macabre allegory, but as a powerful visual expression of Christian doctrine. Through the incarnation, crucifixion, and resurrection, Christ conquers death and restores humanity to life. Further on, within the corpus of individual saints and hagiographical cycles, the image of the lion acquires a particular powerful symbolic and narrative role in the life of Saint Ignatius Theophorus, or God-bearer. According to early Christian tradition and hagiographical sources, the Bishop of Antioch was condemned to death during the persecutions under Trajan and was sent to Rome, where he suffered martyrdom in the arena by wild beasts, most often understood to be lions. This event shaped the iconography of the saint, in which he is shown confronted or attacked by lions, the ferocity of the animals serving to underscore the spiritual triumph of martyrdom. A different, more mediating dimension of the motif emerges in the representations of Saint Mary of Egypt. In the episode following her death, the monk Saint Zosimas of Palestine encounters a lion, peacefully assisting in the burial by digging her grave. In Byzantine art, this scene emphasizes the restoration of harmony between the saint and the natural world, where even the wild beast becomes a humble servant of sanctity. The young martyr Saint Mamas is likewise closely associated with a lion, often depicted riding the animal while holding a lamp and a shepherd's staff, attributes that emphasize his spiritual authority over nature and the triumph of innocence and faith over the forces of violence. A closely related narrative appears in the well-known story of Saint Gerasimos of the Jordan, who removes a thorn from the paw of a wounded lion, after which the animal becomes his devoted companion. As Saint Gerasimos was the disciple of Saint Ephrem the Syrian, elements of their hagiographical traditions occasionally intersect, and the presence of the lion may at times appear within this shared ascetic context of the Desert Fathers, as seen in the Dormition of the latter in Anapavstas monastery at Matora. A comparable iconographic motif characterized the representations of Saint Jerome, whose imagery often includes a lion, whose wounded paw he also heals by removing a thorn. In representations of martyrdom of Saint Euphemia of Chalcedon or Chalcedon, patron saint of Rovinj in Croatia, lions released in the arena refused to attack the saint, instead remaining subdued before her. They were licking her wounds, and she initially was killed by a bear. This miraculous restraint visually proclaims divine protection and the superiority of faith over earthly power. A different aspect of the lion motif appears in the life of Saint Macarius of Rome, where it is recounted that, having been forcibly married by his parents, the saint fled and sought refuge in a cave, living in hidden asceticism among wild animals, including lions. In the biblical story of Samson, or David, or previously Heracles, the hero tears apart a lion with his bare hands, symbolizing the divinely granted strength, and prefigures the triumph of spiritual power over the forces of chaos. And in the third and last category, the lion appears within the domain of architectural design, on facades, portals, pillars, and even on episcopal thrones. In this context, its presence can be heraldic or with other meanings, but is predominantly apotropaic, marking liminal zones and safeguarding the sacred space. A particularly striking example is the marble plaque from the south facade of the Church of St. Nicholas in the Shishevo monastery at Matka, near Skopje, where a composite creature is carved in relief. Two lions, conjoined in a single figure or single head, with a human face and an imperial crown. This chimeric creature, while not without parallels in broader medieval ornamental vocabularies, here acquires a pronounced symbolic charge. Or, for example, this representation of a man killing a lion from Kalonich that resembles a Samson or David or Heracles. Related manifestations of Leonine imagery reinforce this protective function. Above church entrances, lions' heads are often depicted devouring human figures, as for example in the Last Judgment, intensifying their role as guardians against evil. In the porch of the already mentioned Jurcha monastery, the lion appears alongside other animals, a bear, a dog, and a deer, within a broader cosmological framework that includes the calendar cycle. And finally, the motif extends to liturgical furniture, where lions are frequently carved at the base or foot of episcopal thrones, again underscoring their apotropaic or protective significance. And as we have seen, the representations of lion in Byzantine art range from naive, sometimes almost adorably cute, at other times grotesque, stylized, human-like, or realistic. Variations that may initially seem to reflect the differing levels of artistic skills. Yet, this diversity should not be understood simply as a matter of artistic limitation or technical capability. Rather, it reflects the adaptability of the motif across media, regions, and symbolic contexts. The lion can appear both as a threatening force and as a tamed companion, its form shifting in accordance with these opposing or contrasting roles. The lion is not a fixed image, but a highly charged sign, capable of assuming multiple visual and semantic layers depending on its function and meaning within the composition. Across time and space, the roaring image of the lion ultimately reveals the coherence of the Byzantine visual language itself, one in which even the most familiar creature or beast becomes a bearer of profound and layered meaning. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Chronos Pachiou, for the sharing with us a very rich variety of the symbolism of the lion. And we will continue with Dr. Ioannis Perakis. Who's here? Is absent? I don't know. Ioannis Perakis? No. Yes, I know. Sorry, I wasn't informed. Sorry. Okay, so we will pass through. We'll continue with Veselina Georgieva from the Central Library of Bulgarian Academy of Sciences. She will present us the problem of time and eternity in Orthodox hymns.
Good afternoon. I'm also so happy and honored to participate in that conference. This is my first time. Hope subject will be for us. По-високо. Проблема за времето и вечността в православните песнопения. В християнската мисъл проблема за вечността и времето е основната християнска философска проблематика. Вечността не е нещо не е безкрайно време, а качествено различно състояние. Т.е. приемаме, че това е присъствието на Бог. Чрез богослужението човек притежава съединяване на временното и вечното, т.е. днес в кавички, ако го приемем, приемаме, че това е днес на спасението. Православната химнография е богословение и песен. Химнографията или църковните песнопения не са само поезия или израз на богословски истини. Тя предава догматите чрез образи, символи и ритъм. Музиколози като свети Йоан Дамаскин и свети Роман Сладкопевец съчетават поезията и богословието. Богослужебното днес прави събитията от историята актуални и живи. Песнопенията пренасят вярващия от ежедневното време към духовната реалност. Чрез тях времето става врата към вечността или среща с Божието присъствие. Времето, което е тварно или изменяемо или линейно, е създадено от Бога. Изменяемо и линейно има начало и развитие, а вечността е божествената реалност, безначална, безкрайна и непроменяема. Между тях съществува онтологична разлика, т.е. творение срещу творец. В лицето на Исус Христос вечността влиза в историята. Бог приема човешка природа и влиза във времето без да престава да бъде вечен. Това е пресечната точка между тварното и нетварното или библейското свидетелство. И Словото стана път и живя между нас. Това е Евангелието от Йоан 1:14. Тоест Словото е самият Бог, който влиза в човешката история. Втората част от цитата живя между нас означава реалното участие на човешкия живот и време. Това събитие прави възможно единението с Бога. Въплъщението открива възможността времето да стане път към вечността. Литургичното днес, това е времето преобразено в вечност. В богослужението времето не е просто хронология, а среща с вечността. Централното понятие е анемнезис или възпоменанието, което не е само спомен, а реално участие в събитието. Миналото го приемаме като настояще. Събитията от спасителната история не остават в миналото. В литургиката те стават живата реалност, тук и сега. Миналото се преживява като действащо настояще. Езикът на богослужението, това са изразите днес, сега, в този ден. Времето се осветява, т.е. подчертават се спасителните събития и се случват в духовен план в настоящия момент. Времето се осветява и преобразява чрез Божието присъствие, превръща се в сакрално време, времето на срещата с Бога. Литургичното днес разкрива как времето става врата към вечността. Тропарът на Рождество е богословието на времето. Рождество Твое, Христе Боже наш. Възсия на света светлината на познанието. Богословският акцент тук не се казва роди се, а Рождество възсия. Събитието не е затворено в миналото, а има вечно настоящо действие. Раждането на Исус Христос се разкрива като непрестанно сияние. Светлината възприемаме като символ на познанието. Не е еднократен акт, продължава да свети във всяко едно общение с Бога. Тя осветява не само миналото, а настоящето на вярващия. Светлината има вечен, незалязващ характер. Чрез химнографията вярващият не си спомня само, а участва в самото събитие. Рождеството се преживява като жива духовна реалност. Това е участието в незалязващата истина на въплъщението. Тропарът превръща историческото събитие в нещо, във вечно настояще, срещата с Божията светлина. Песнопението за Велики петък, днес на кръста, днес той, който окачи земята на водите, виси на дърво. Това е песнопението за Великия петък. Днес не е художествен или театрален израз. Това е богословската истина. Събитието се разкрива като действащо в настоящето. Кръстната жертва не е затворена в миналото, а е вечно присъстваща реалност. Богослужението вярващият не просто си спомня, а се преживява. Той духовно стои пред кръста и участва в събитието. Историята се превръща в личен опит на спасението. Днес на Велики петък разкрива как страданието и жертвата на Христос са винаги актуални и спасителни. Пасха, или сега всичко се изпълни със светлина, това православно песнопение, приемаме, че сега изразява литургичното настояще, времето изпълнено с Божието присъствие. Възкресението не е просто едно минало събитие, а е жива и действаща реалност. То надхвърля историческите граници и принадлежи на вечността. Всичко се изпълни със светлина. Това е знак за пълно преобразяване на творението. Светлината на Исус Христос озарява света тук и сега. Тъмнината на смъртта е победена в настоящия момент. Не само човекът, а цялото творение участва във възкресението. Вселената ликува в настоящото на спасението. Това е участие в вечния живот. Пасхалното сега разкрива възкресението като вечно настояще, което преобразява всичко. Неделният тропар, живото сега на възкресението. Когато слезе при смъртта, живот е безсмъртни. Всяка неделя с преживяване на Пасха в литургичния план, възкресението на Христос се възвестява като настоящо събитие. Църквата живее в постоянния ритъм на вечното спасение. Тропарът не описва минало събитие, а го прави реално и действащо. Това е проповед в песен, която въвежда в тайната на възкресението. Не знам защо, извинявам се, че презентацията не е такава, каквато я направих. Нямам представа, няма значение. Да. Глаголните форми съчетават минало и настояще. Получава се настояще в миналото, актуализация на събитието. Така вярващият участва в живата реалност на победата над смъртта. Неделният тропар разкрива възкресението като непрекъснато действащо сега в живота на църквата. Есхатологичните песнопения, бъдещето като настояще. Когато дойдеш в слава, помени ме, Господи. Есхатологията не е бъдеще просто някъде там. Тя е реалност, която вече се осъществява в живота на църквата. Бъдещето царство се преживява тук и сега в зародиш. Вярващият едновременно очаква и участва. Литургията е вход към Царството Божие. Молитвата не е молба, а жив диалог с идващия Господ. Бъдещето се отваря в настоящето чрез богослужението. Времето става място на среща с очаквателната реалност. Така човек вкусва от вечността още сега. Есхатологичните песнопения разкриват, че Царството Божие е очаквано, но и вече преживяно в литургичното сега. Достойно ест е песнопение за Богородица, без тление си родила Бога Слово. В лицето на Света Богородица се съединяват времето и вечността. Тя ражда във времето онзи, който е вечен по природа. Това е тайната на въплъщението, вена в историята. Исус Христос е вечният Бог и влиза в конкретен исторически момент. Чрез Богородица вечността става достъпна за човека. Събитието има непреходно значение и действие. Химнът се пее по време на Светата Евхаристия, върховното таинство. Това е момент на най-пълно навлизане в Царството Божие. Миналото събитие на въплъщението се преживява като настоящата реалност. Достойно ест разкрива как чрез Богородица вечността влиза във времето и остава действаща в живота на църквата. И в заключение искам да кажа, че църковните песнопения са не само поезия или някакъв текст, а живото богословие, което се изпълнява и преживява в самата литургия. Те съединяват времето и вечността в литургичното днес, така че миналото събитие на въплъщението, на кръста и на възкресението става актуално и действащо в настоящия момент. Вярващият си спомня събитията и духовно участва в тях, стои пред кръста, преживява радостта на Рождеството, сиянието на Пасха, очаква Царството Божие. Времето се превръща в икона на вечността, осветено, преобразено, преобразяващо място на среща с Бога. Чрез химнографията църквата ни въвежда в тайната на спасението, показвайки, че времето е повече от хронология, то е път към вечността, в който вярващият преживява Божието действие тук и сега. Благодаря ви за
Thank you, Dr. Georgieva, for her contribution in the multiple notions of time and eternity through the hymnography. Thank you. Now I think it's time to start our discussion for those very, very interesting communications that we have just heard. Let's begin from the communication of Alexander Vasilevsky. Constructing sacredness, time, space, and the role of monasteries in the medieval world. Any questions? Our colleague? Yes.
I have no questions, but I would like to say that this was a really, really very interesting paper, and I want to make my congratulations about this so clear applying an theory of Michel Foucault, which is dedicated to some other field, scientific field, and so clean. Dr. Vasilevsky applied it to the Orthodox monastery culture, and it was very interesting because we used with the hierotopy and this kind of terminology, and this heterotopy and heterochrony. It was very interesting and very, very successfully used to our monasteries. Thank you, and thank you very much for this so interesting paper.
I fully agree. The analysis concerning Foucault, the analysis concerning Lidov, and all the examples were very, very well combined. Thank you very much. So let's proceed to Dr. Ralica Ruseva, those beautiful icons from, not only from Neseba, from Black Sea coast, and their meaning, their notion concerning Chronos. Any question? I have one, but first, from the floor is yours. If you have no. Okay, I would like to ask you, dear Ralica, you have showed us among the very rich material, an icon from Nesebar with many scenes all around and a gap in the center. What was there? A relic? Another small icon? An ancient icon?
Called composite icons. But this small icon in the center disappeared through the centuries. And I wrote about the hypothesis what image it was, because from the both sides, from the one side is Archangel Gabriel, from the other is Holy Virgin. It is Annunciation. And maybe it is something like a small model of the iconography of the apse. Maybe in the center was the Holy Virgin Oranta, or maybe in the center was a Christ, or something like this. Or maybe there is some icon as a icon in the National Historical Museum from Ohrid, which is with dodecagon on the stone.
Yes.
It's also possible. Yes, but this small icon disappeared. Yes, thank you.
Could it be an ancient icon? an icon of the same period?
It is, the provenance is not clear, but I suppose that most surely it's from Neseba.
Okay.
Yes. The star is connected with the Macedonian Renaissance. The papers are not from Constantinople, are connected with the Thessaloniki or Montatos.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it was also very, very interesting, both icons with epitaphios, thrinos, with only angels lamenting.
Yes, they are absolutely unique. There is some doubting about the dating of these icons, because there is an inscription, but maybe it's later on the one of the icons from the 16th century. But instead, there is no parallel. It is just the iconography from the epitaphios, thrinos from the shroud, and the icons, the wooden icons. We have known this tradition, and we have two from Mesembria. It means that there is some local tradition connected with these processions with the shroud.
Yes.
And we have two.
Perhaps through the litany of epitaphios itself?
Yes, I think that surely it will be in the procession, the litany on the Great Friday, the lamentation of Christ, because when we're talking about the hymnography, in this poetry hymnography, one of the there was a phrase called the angels are crying,
yes.
They can't believe of this. This maybe connected with this litany. Yeah, but there is no parallel in Byzantium of this kind of icons.
Thank you very much. And let's proceed to the communication of Elizabeth Negrau. Some realistic depictions of relics in Kosia Monastery, Memorial. Any questions?
Oh, it was really very interesting. Congratulations about this dark topic. But
we will talk later at a glass of wine.
The death ideology, yes. It's very okay. And let's proceed to Gehonas Pachiou, the lion, concerning the lion. This very fascinating subject.
I would like to say something, yes. Because I'm not only a cat lover, I'm the greatest cat lover. Everybody knows it.
Same here.
And I would like to give you some more examples about the diversity of symbolism of the lion and this antinomy of the symbolism. And as a divine protector, you can see now in the crypt of St. Alexander Nevsky a fresco from the town of Cherven, which was connected from the Trnovo, the capital of Trnovo. It's from the 13th century, and there is a soldier, saint soldier, and on his aegidas there is a lion, not only head of lion, as we know from the Italian paintings. It is lion, and it's maybe the influence from the book Illumination. It's the tail is very nice, and it's very, very beautiful cat. You can see this example from the 13th century. And the other example you know very well about the protection with the gates and the doors, the doors from the Ohrid from Nikola Bolnichki, which is in the National History Museum.
Yeah, I've seen it in
yes, because it's
an
emblem of apotropaic function.
Maybe that, thank you very much for the example, for the first
example. And for the fresco you have to see, because it's very beautiful. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the first example. I haven't seen it yet. For the second, I know it. But if I collected already, although I already mentioned that there were just selected examples of which maybe you saw by yourself that most of them were Macedonian examples,
Yes.
because they are from my country and I wanted to present them, of course. And if I had to collect all the known and unknown examples, that would be a plenary presentation or more time for me. Yeah.
Next time.
Next time, yes.
And concerning the hagiography, I would like to add only St. Mama's iconography. St. Mama's
Yes,
in
yes.
Cyprus, who is riding a lion in quite a few examples, especially
there are.
in Cyprus. Yes, yes. So, okay.
Yes, and there is a paper by Smitha Gavrić
Yes.
about
Yes.
him and his iconography, so yes, there are more examples.
Any other questions or comments? No. And let's go to the last one. Veselinas Georgieva's communication, the problem of time and eternity in Orthodox hymns. Hymnography? No. Okay, everything was clear. Thank you very much. So let's close this part, this session, the third session, and according to the program, there is a reception for the participants. Yes.
You're welcome to our reception. I would like to say something. For all the participants, the entrance in the National Art Gallery and the bunches of art gallery as the Crypt, the Museum of Christian Art, and the Palace are free. With the badges, you can enter in the National Art Gallery and the bunches of art gallery without tickets. Thank you, and you're welcome to our reception.